Okay, so let's get started. So today's the last time we'll meet before the exam on Wednesday. And I'll just introduce photosynthesis, and I'll try and end a little bit early today so that we can have a little bit of a review. So think about the kinds of content that you have questions about. If there are specific principles, terms, definitions, whatever that you are having trouble with, that will be the time to talk about them. I don't have the exam completely written yet. I've made a start on it, and so I don't know exactly what's going to be on the exam and how that content will appear. However, if there is content that you would like to see and a way that you would like to see it, I'm definitely open to suggestions. Okay? We're going to shift now from kind of term and definition-based lectures to process-based lectures. Chapters 5 and 6 were introducing concepts, right? I'm sorry, chapters 4 and 5 were introducing concepts. And so chapter 4, we worked through the cell and identified major organelles and talked about their structure and their function in the context of the cell. Now what we're going to start doing is talking about how it is those organelles function. And we're going to use two metabolic processes that really illustrate the functionality of those organelles. So you guys, you want to look at photosynthesis and the next chapter, which will be cellular respiration, as a synthesis of all the things that we've talked about so far. Because we're going to be talking about not just organelles, but the kinds of reactions that they perform, and how it is those, on a molecular level, those reactions look. So we need to think back to bonding and molecular structure and things like that to really understand this kind of content. However, I find this kind of content more engaging than structure and function type content. So hopefully that will work to our benefit. So photosynthesis is something that we've understood since grade school, right? I mean, we know that plants are able to take some solar energy and then they use that solar energy to make organic molecules, and not just they use, but that we're able to use as well. So what I want to do is talk about regionally where it is photosynthesis occurs and the structures that are involved in that process that is photosynthesis. So leaves are an adaptation on plants, and they're a unique adaptation that increase the amount of surface area that they have exposed to radiant solar energy. That's their primary purpose, provide a large surface area for this reaction to occur. Now, most leaves that we're familiar with, and there are exceptions to this, but most leaves that we're familiar with are rather broad and relatively flat. Now, broad, flat surface is great, right? Because broad increases surface area, but that flatness decreases volume relative to the surface area. So it's a very favorable surface area to volume ratio. Now that's important because through this metabolic process that is photosynthesis, there's going to be carbon dioxide that's inhaled by the plants and then reduced into sugar. And then through that process, oxygen gas is produced, and that's a metabolic poison for most plants. And so that small volume allows plants to diffuse out that oxygen gas really, really efficiently. Okay, excuse me. So on the plant there is some leaf, right? And leaves are great because they have this really broad, flat structure that's great for absorbing radiant solar energy. And they have a flat structure that's really, really good for diffusing in the kinds of gases they need and diffusing out the kinds of gases that they don't want. The problem with that, though, is with that small volume to surface area ratio, they're also able to lose water really easily. And water is an important molecule for the process of photosynthesis. So to prevent the loss of water, what plants do is they completely cover their leaves in a type of fat called cutin, which is collectively called the cuticle. And you guys are familiar with this waxy substance. Like when you hold an apple, it feels waxy, right? In fact, you can almost scratch that wax off. That's cutin. That's a cuticle that prevents water loss. So that's awesome, right? I mean, they can prevent water from being lost from the leaf. But that cutin, excuse me, also prevents the exchange of gases, which they need for photosynthesis. So what plants have done is they've evolved a pore called a stoma, or plural is stomata. And through these pores, they're able to exchange gases. And again, these pores are just inserted into the epidermis. And the epidermis is just a single layer of cells, it's a tissue that are tightly packed, that help prevent water loss a little bit, and help prevent the invasion of things like fungi and bacteria. What's interesting about these pores is they're hydrostatically controlled. What that means is the opening and closing of the stomata is controlled by how much water there is in the plant. When water starts to leave the plant and the plant becomes water stressed, that's what it's called, those stomata close so that water can't be lost out of the stomata any longer. But as we'll find out at the end of this chapter, closing stomata is a bad thing for photosynthesis. Okay, so the outside of the cell has this layer of tissue called the epidermis, and right under the epidermis there are the photosynthetic tissues, which are called mesophyll. So if we were to take a cross-section of our leaf over here, it would look something like this. So we'll just take this edge of the leaf and we're going to magnify it. Right here. So the upper layer and the lower layer of the plant's leaf cross-section is epidermis. And these are all just tightly packed cells that have those stomata incorporated into them. And then the lower has epidermis as well. Right below the epidermis, there is a tissue, a series of tissues called the mesophyll. And the mesophyll cells are kind of long and cuboidal like this, but there's a lot of space in between adjacent mesophyll cells. Like that. That's mesophyll. Now the mesophyll cells, the mesophyll tissues, is where photosynthesis occurs. So those cells are all kind of spaced out, so they're not touching the adjacent cell. Why would that be? Why would you want to have a lot of space in between adjacent cells?
Surface area?
Yeah, that's exactly why. Surface area. What you're doing is you're exposing a lot of surface area on that cell. But why is that a good thing?
More surface area to create growth.
Okay, to create more photosynthesis is exactly correct. What this is doing is it's exposing a lot of surface area to absorb carbon dioxide and to release oxygen and to absorb water. Okay? Yeah. It's also, yeah, go ahead, Carlos.
So, with the epidermis and the mesophyll, the stoma then kind of acts to diffuse all the different gases and the different water?
So the way that it works is like this, and I'll draw a stomata right here. A stoma. So stomata are in the epidermis, and what they're doing is they're allowing air in, or excuse me, carbon dioxide in really, and oxygen back out. The stomata aren't incorporated into the mesophyll cells. They're just allowing carbon dioxide next to the mesophyll cells. And then that carbon dioxide and oxygen and water are all passively moved inside the mesophyll cells. It's a product of diffusion. So there's a lower concentration of carbon dioxide in water inside the mesophyll cells, so the diffusion gradient will be from outside to inside the cell. Conversely, there's a higher concentration of oxygen inside the mesophyll cells than out. And so that's naturally going to diffuse out of the mesophyll cells. Okay, now there is this organelle, right, that's involved in photosynthesis. And there's a very high concentration of chloroplasts inside the mesophyll cells. In actuality, any part of the plant that is green has mesophyll cells, or excuse me, has chloroplasts in it. So there are some trees that have green bark. That bark is green because it has chloroplasts in it. Okay, so any green part of the plant has chloroplasts. So if we were to take one of these mesophyll cells, we'll just take this one, and we were to magnify it, it would look something like this, where there is a cell wall and a large nucleus, and then many chloroplasts. And it has all the other organelles as well. It has endoplasmic reticulum, and it has lysosomes and a large central vacuole and all that stuff. But it has lots of these chloroplasts. And chloroplasts are the organelle that is involved in photosynthesis. Yeah?
Was this what we were looking at in the that one lab with the little
Yeah.
things with the nucleus and the chloroplast kind of in the corner and stuff like that?
Yep, that's exactly it. So you were looking at Elodia, which is an aquatic plant, and you saw individual cells and then a large open space in the middle that was the central vacuole, and then you saw probably floating around the outside of that cell some little green dots, and those were the chloroplasts.
Okay.
Yep. So if we were to take that chloroplast and we were to magnify it, it would look something like this. So we're going to just magnify this guy right here. You'll recall that chloroplasts consist of at least how many membranes? At least 3. There's an outer and an inner membrane at least, and then there is a series of stacked membranes called thylakoid. It looks something like this, right? And all of the thylakoid membrane is contiguous, really. It has a common lumen, is what that's called. Now that stack of wiggly-looking membrane is called a granum. Plural is grana. And it's all stacked up inside the chloroplast. So there is an outer membrane, an inner membrane, and a thylakoid membrane. Now that thylakoid membrane is important because it holds the photosynthetic pigment, or the molecule that receives solar energy. And that molecule is called chlorophyll. Now, also incorporated into the thylakoid membrane, we have not just the chlorophyll, but other proteins that are going to be involved in the conversion of solar energy into another type of chemical energy. Okay, so incorporated into the thylakoid membrane, we have these proteins, and then we also have chlorophyll. And chlorophyll it exists in multiple formats. There's a chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B that we'll talk about a little bit later. But they're able to receive a photon, a little packet of light, because they have a magnesium ion incorporated into their molecular structure. And that magnesium ion is really the sensitive part of the chlorophyll. Now, plants appear green. Why? Because they absorb green light or because they reflect green light? Reflected, exactly right. So all of the color phenomenons that you and I see is a product of that wavelength of light being reflected back to our eyes, right? So Sarai's jacket appears red to us, not because it's absorbing the red spectrum of light, but because it's reflecting that red light back to our eyes. So what that means for the plants is they're not absorbing green light, they're reflecting it, but they're absorbing either side of the green spectrum. And we'll talk about light in just a few minutes. But they're absorbing like violet and blue, reflecting greens and yellows, and then they're absorbing reds and oranges. But that's not always the case, right? Because if you look outside at these trees behind us, those two trees on either side of the conifer don't appear green, right? What color are they? They're yellow and red. There comes a time when plants shift the kinds of photosynthetic pigments that they have. Now, when we see those kinds of trees, typically what we think is they're getting ready to die or go dormant, right? Those leaves are dying. But in actuality, that's not the case. There are some additional pigments that plants have that reflect lower energy lights and begin to absorb lots of high energy light. And those are called the accessory pigments. And again, we'll talk about those in a few minutes. Now we can take these chlorophyll molecules, and what we do is we organize them into distinct functional units called photosystems. And there are two photosystems that we'll talk about in the context of photosynthesis. You'll become very familiar with their structure and also how it is they convert solar energy into two other molecules. But basically what they are is a bunch of structural proteins that hold chlorophyll molecules somewhat close together so that it becomes a really effective solar antenna. All right, are we okay with this stuff so far, like where photosynthesis is occurring? Because one of the questions that I really like to ask is something like, in which of the following tissues does photosynthesis primarily occur? And the answer would be mesophyll, yeah. And understanding like why the mesophyll has that airy